Hello, and welcome to a new episode of the STEM Confidence Podcast. Have you ever wondered how to explain complex topics to someone who is maybe not an expert in your field, yet you need them to understand your work? If you answered yes to this question, this episode is for you. First of all, I would like to say that the number one skill any STEM professional should have is knowing how to simplify their data and make it accessible to a broader audience. There are several reasons why I believe this is so important. The first one is because we often need to collaborate with people from different fields. And to understand each other, we need to take into account that we are not all experts in everything. Therefore, if you need to teach your colleague or collaborator something, you need to be able to explain your work in quite a simple way. The second reason why I believe the ability to simplify is such an essential skill is because we want our data and our work to create impact. The main job many of us do, whether we are scientists or data analysts or engineers or whatever, is to be able to make sense of data and explain what the data is telling us. So I hope that by this argumentation I convinced you that you should really make sure you are able to simplify your findings and knowledge without losing the main point. Here are some of my favorite tips on how to achieve it. Number one is to take your audience into account. And this tip might sound obvious, but it really isn't. Just think of how many times have you been sitting in a presentation not understanding anything and wondering what the speaker is trying to say. From my personal experience, it happened more than once. This mainly happens because people are so focused on what they want to say that they completely forget that there is an audience who is trying to learn something new. To avoid this from happening to you, whenever you start to prepare your talk or your presentation, just take a moment to think about your audience. Who are they? Are they experts in the field or not? What are they here for? What is the purpose of your presentation? Just by asking yourself these basic questions, you can really improve the way you are thinking about your presentation. You will instantly become more aware of how you should present your data so that it is simple enough and makes sense to your audience. Tip number two is to use examples. This one is probably one of my favorites. Using examples is very underrated, but it can really work wonders, especially if your audience is not so familiar with your topic and you're explaining something that is quite complex. When I first started teaching at university, which was already 3 years ago, I remember I was struggling to get my students' attention when I was discussing something complex. Then one day I had this great idea to just give them examples of why what we are doing is important. I remember that I was designing my classes the following way: one concept, one example. This means that with every piece of information I was sharing, I would instantly provide an example of how it can be applied. Of course, depending on your audience, sometimes you will use more technical examples and sometimes you will use more relatable ones. Whatever the case, using examples is a super powerful tool when it comes to simplification. All right, and tip number three is to avoid jargon. Avoiding jargon is, in my opinion, a form of showing respect to your audience, especially if it consists of people coming from different fields. Imagine that people are already confused by so many new concepts that you are explaining, so what we want to achieve is to make them feel as much at ease as possible. And this probably won't happen if you are constantly using jargon or very technical language that is specific to your field. So take into account that not everyone is familiar with the nomenclature of your field. And this is why, in my opinion, reducing the technical jargon to the minimum is always the best option. So, to make a quick recap, when you are explaining a complex topic, think about your audience. Ask yourself, what are they here for and what is their background? Also, when explaining new concepts, try to use as many examples as possible to make your content easier to digest. And most importantly, avoid the use of technical jargon that not everyone might be familiar with. I hope you will find these tips useful and actually apply them whenever you have to make complex stuff sound simple. Thank you for listening, and until next time. Thank you for listening to this episode. If you are ready to elevate your communication skills and transform your data into valuable insights, schedule a free discovery call on the link in the description.